What's going on, guys? Kaiga here. Today we're doing the PvP tier list for fairies. The list has been available on my Discord, link down below, for a bit. It took me a while to sit down and record this, but right above me is the tier list. We're going to go over it. What I tried to do is I try to do them in order, so from S tier, from left to right, should be in order, as well as they're also ranked by type. So as you see, we did holy, water, wind, fire, earth. So it's tough to compare them across types. So I just try to keep them to their typing. You'll also see that S, A, B the same way like that. So starting from, let's just start from the bottom. C tier, these are 3 of the 4 Gen 1 fairies. Only one missing here is Primrose that we'll talk about later. And these don't do a whole lot in PvP. You can say that Candok, the water one, the healing can be helpful. And it just really isn't enough, even if you spec into it with a full water echo. It's just not healing enough, and that's because it's balanced around the fact that it heals AoE. And that doesn't really allow you to keep going. Now, going into the B tier, we'll talk from Holy and work our way over. So first is going to be Twin Lotus. As we saw, she was number 1 in our PvE tier list, but her main thing is damage against monsters, and that's not really going to help you in PvP. Sure, you can be one-shotted by overpowered whale with a huge Twin Lotus because it just does good damage, but that's generally, in PvP, we're looking for stuns, we're looking for buffs, we're looking for things like this. Same kind of thing with Gypsophilia. Gypsophilia can be cool in PvP because of her buffs and that she stacks and gets going, but a lot of PvP matches, I'm sure as you're aware, are done in 5 to 10 seconds. And you're going to get one cast. Maybe if you use dodges, move around, you'll get 2 casts, which isn't enough to do anything with her. Then we go into water, and Hydreiga, you can make an argument for her to be an A tier because she does do a silence, she does give you a huge defense increase, but she is in the B tier for me, specifically because water is just a weak PvP spec in my opinion. Then on to wind, Elduis. So the crit immunity is nice, but that's not what wind is trying to do. The attack, actually using the skill, is pretty slow, easy to dodge, especially two of the classes we have in game can just easily dodge it out of nowhere, being dragon lancers. They can use their dashes to get around the place. Same with wind chaser that can just ignore it and keep going. Then we go on to earth with, where's she at? Daisy. So Daisy is a PvP fairy. It's just her taunt mechanic, which sounds really cool, isn't really enough damage. All it is hey, you take damage if you attack someone other than me. That is kind of what a tank character wants, but we have way better options, especially in the earth category. Then we go over to fire, Ixoria. She's a pretty decent PvE fairy, but in PvP, she loses out to the fact that she consumes 25% of current HP, and in most skirmishes, you're trying to drop fairies very early in the fight, which even if you already took a hit, you're losing 20% of your max HP realistically, and that's not really going to help you. If this is something like Shrine, it can be okay if you're already low and then going into the next fight, because you lose 25% of current and then gain percent max. But it's really trying to do a long haul type deal, giving you bonuses and letting you do more damage. She also obviously does regular fairy skill type damage, but she's a long burn type unit, very similar to what we talked about earlier in the tier. Then we go on to Earth, which we have Marigold, which is decent, just not up in the higher tiers. As we see, reducing their movement speed, and it also just tells you what it's trying to do, right? Increase characters' damage to Earth monsters by 30% after hitting enemies. So it makes it clear that it's a PvE unit, but the reducing 30% speed, if you're using a Earth Echo, she will just be in your Echo because there aren't better options right now. But in the overall scheme of things, she's not the top fairy. Then we have one of my favorites, Carnation, but she does a huge AoE. She makes them, reduces their speed and makes them unable to dodge, but the time it takes to stack up to do the effect just takes way too long. She is the queen of AoE PvE, but in PvP she's just not cutting it. Then we go on to the A tier, which, starting from Holy, we have Rimuru. Rimuru can be very, very powerful. As we know, does damage, gives them debuffs, which can be as weak as minus 5% attack, or as strong as something like minus 10% crit. The big thing is the King of Gluttony, which eats their buffs. You have to be careful because it doesn't eat all buffs. It primarily takes stat buffs like plus attack, things like this. Or if you have something like plus attack plus crit, it'll eat the attack, it will not eat the crit, things like this. It makes it very, very awkward. But as you scale it up, for each one that it eats, it'll give you multiple. It can be a very, very good counter fairy. They get buffs, you strip them, you get buffs, beat them up. Then we have Mistletoe. Mistletoe is very, very powerful. One of the only ones that the basic attack actually does something, healing you. And the ultimate puts down the cage. And remember that when you use a dodge skill, you get invincibility frames, and that's how a lot of people end up dodging or ignoring a bunch of damage or effects coming in them. But as you see right here, ignores invincibility. So if you put the cage on them and they try to run away, even if they use a dodge to dodge out of it, they will be stunned regardless. Very, very powerful PvP unit. The only reason it's not in S tier is because the S tiers are all better, in my opinion. Then we go into Laurel, who is definitely weaker than the other two for Holy in PvP. The main thing he's bringing to the table, all he does is damage, but the speed and flat damage he's dealing is enough to warrant him coming to the table. Then we go into Water. Viola does a nice AoE. Slows all of her effects slow, including her basic attack. Does extra bleed damage over time. Does a big AoE, which ends up being a knockup. Her basic attack does the flake ice like we talked about. Just anything that's able to do something on basic attack is going to be a little bit higher in most game modes. But she is specialized for PvP. Then Lotus. Lotus is pretty quick. Minus 80% movement speed is huge. Bringing them in is very, very huge. As well as the speed of her skill is very powerful. Then we get into Wind. Balloon Flower. Balloon Flower is at the same time one of the best fairies and one of the worst fairies at the same time. The actual effect is very, very strong, but the rate at which you're able to hit it is very, very low because of the wind-up time, and it takes a picture of where it needs to go when you press the skill, but by the time it actually shows up on the board, people have moved and done something else at that time. But when you're able to, it reduces their defense by 20%, which is huge. Only 2 seconds, but that's still something, as well as bringing them in continuously, which is powerful. Dandelion, one of the coolest fairies in the entire game, and that's because whatever you use before her is going to give you a bonus. Not to mention, she always gets Strong Wind, which is Pierce Rate, which is very, very powerful, specifically in PvP. The primary ones that you would look at, let me find it right here, are going to be Wind, because she's on the team. The character gets 24% pierce rate, which is huge, on top of what you're already getting, especially with classes that already get a good amount, such as Lancer. And Holy is also one that you will see. Where's it at? Fire, Water, Wind, Earth, Holy. Damage dealt will seal the dodge for 3 seconds and increase your attack for 8 seconds. Very, very powerful. It's effects like this that we're going to see as we go up. If you have her next to a Holy, you're able to effectively make it a stun. If you're doing it with another Wind unit, you can make it more burst. Then we go into Fire, and both of these are very, very similar. We have Rose and Diablo. Rose is AoE and silences a bit less, and Diablo is single target and silences longer. Anti-magic area, even though the area of itself is AoE, you are initially targeting one person, and you're pretty much guaranteed to hit that one person. If other people walk into it, sure, but you're primarily targeting one person, and the silence is a little bit less. Then we work our way into the S tiers. Probably the best one right now will be Sakura. You just 8%, 30% pierce rate for 8 seconds, as well as can't move for 2 seconds. Obviously, that's just not moving. That does turn off a lot of abilities, but it doesn't turn off all abilities, so you do have to be careful. And then as you scale up, the actual damage puts her a little above, like, I'd say the top 70 to 80% of fairies as far as actual skill damage. Then we have quickly, easily number 2 in my opinion, Milim, and that is because of her switch effect, giving you a free slow, as well as increasing the damage you deal with your other fairies. Fairies do a crazy amount of damage, and the actual active ability crushes PvP. The actual range that it entails, as you know, with fairies, you can't really target their skill use besides targeting a person and then clicking the skill. The range at which that if you click the button it will lock someone in place is massive and just does a huge truckload of damage. We go into Licorice. This is focused on AoE PvP, so Shrine, things like this. The damage is deceptive because the damage is low, but it hits 6 times, as well as a long stun. We're going into the similar things over here with water. I'll have to show you over here, and that's Lavender. Lavender puts someone to sleep for 8 seconds, increasing the damage they take, but after they take a certain amount of damage, they will wake up. You have several options here. You can either use this as a burst window, put them to sleep and then burst them, or you can sleep one guy, kill another, and come back to this guy later. Lavender gives you a ton of options. Then we have Ikoria, who gives you anti-CC, stun, silence, other effects. Most ignore type effects are specifically knock up, knock back, and pull effects. This is pretty much everything besides bleeds, damage over times, things like this. As well as their actual effect itself. Phantom Sea Melody deals damage and reduces their movement speed. As you know, movement speed is very, very important, as well as heals % of missing HP. Then we go into Hyracanthe. Hyracanthe just gives you a bunch of pierce rate and cooldown reduction, which, coupled with the new highest tier of Wind Echo, makes it huge in PvP. You're able to just use all your abilities, keep going, keep going, keep going, especially with a class like Marksman, who in PvP has to give up a bit of their mechanic. Normally you're able to use all 4 Marksman abilities and you're just rotating, but in PvP, primarily the bigger players have been swapping the AoE type skill with the other side, Wind Chaser, to get some CC going, so you aren't able to get your multi arrows as quickly and as consistently. But this allows you to help, as well as the other side. Wind Chaser is allowed to keep going. Wind Chaser never had a problem with cooldown. It's just their animations take way too long. If they lowered the cooldown animations for Wind Chaser, it would skyrocket in the rankings, in my opinion. Then we go into Fire, which is going to be Anatheria. Anatheria does damage, does weaken, which they can't heal, which is 5 seconds, which is kind of long. And if they're under 40%, deal 80% bonus damage. The actual flat damage it deals is in the top 70-80% as well. Just huge damage. Now, Winter Cherry doesn't seem like she'd be great in PvP just because of how her flammability and flamification works. It's primarily her passive. And what's happening here is once you take a hit, then for the next 6 seconds, you get up to 24% damage reduction, as well as immune to knock up, knock back, and draw effects. Just very, very powerful, and always going to be on a PvP fire team. Last but not least, we'll talk about Earth, and that's going to be Foxglove. Foxglove does do good damage, gives yourself kind of a small shield, but it refreshes itself several times, does good damage, and it can increase the duration of the shield if you hit multiple times. But what's really doing it right here is Hinduism. The passive primarily goes with units that are able to give themselves their own shield, like Priest, that will give yourself, scaling up, 5% crit rate and minus 30% duration of control effects on you. So everyone's trying to increase their duration with things like nightmare, things like this, but if you're able to reduce it, you're able to keep going. Last but not least, primrose. Primrose doesn't really have a tell. You know it's being used, but the timing is wonky and hard to predict, as well as the moment it obviously stuns for 2 seconds, but the thing that's important here is it increases your damage reduction by 18%, which is a massive increase, just like we talked about with Winter Cherry. Let me know what you guys think down below. Until next time, guys.